Hello guys, and welcome to another tutorial. So in today's video we are going to be looking at custom hooks in React. So we'll start by looking at what custom hooks are and how to write your own custom hook. Then we'll move to example 1 where we look at form input. Then we'll move to how to reuse logic between components. Example 2, counter. How to name and structure your custom hook. Example 3, fetch API data. When and why to extract custom hooks. So we are going to be covering all of this in today's video. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so that you get notified whenever we create a new video. So without wasting much of your time, let's dive into the tutorial. So as you can see, I have like a basic React application with two inputs and a submit button. If we come here, you see we just have two state variables, first name and last name, and two inputs that are being mapped to those variables. So we have the handle first name change with the handle last name change that take care of the updates that are being made to the input. Like if a new value is entered, then it updates our state variable. So this is like the normal way of doing things without making use of custom hooks. And you notice that if we have like 5 inputs, then we have to keep duplicating over and over and over. Well, if we have just a single input and we are sure that we only have a single input in our application, then this way is completely fine. But if we are going to have multiple inputs that we want to manage the state, then it will be good for us to create a custom hook that can help us in doing that. So let's see how we can go about creating such a hook. So I will move into my hooks folder, my hooks directory, which is currently empty. Then we are going to create our first hook. But before we create our first hook, we need to understand what custom hooks are. So custom hooks are just like a way of extracting reusable logic and converting it into like a single unit where we can now call it over and over without having to rewrite the entire logic over and over again. So it's just a normal JavaScript function, but it does more than just that. Like it actually uses other hooks within the function because that's what actually makes it a hook. So you need to make use of other hooks such as use state, use effect within that function before you can call it a hook in React. So for us to see this in action, I'm going to create a hook to manage our form inputs. So I'll just call this hook use form input.jsx. Now for this, we are just going to say function use form input. So it is a best practice to always make sure the name of your hook start with the use keyword and then followed by the name of the hook, and always try to make sure the name of your hook is descriptive. So it should kind of describe what that hook is going to be used for. Like you see our example, we have use form input. Now within our hook, we want to make sure we have all this logic within our hook so that we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over. So for that, I will declare, like I will first start by importing use. Let's say we import use state from React, and we also import, we don't really need use effect, so we import use state and declare state variable here, value, and set value equal to use state. So that's our state variable. Now we declare our unchanged listener. So handle change. So this is going to be called whenever our input is being modified. So handle change, and then we want to set value to e dot target dot value, and then we need to return both the value and the change listener so that we can we use that in a component where we are calling our custom hook. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's say cons input props object having the value and then the unchange, which is on the change. Okay, so remember we always want to have our initial value, right? Because someone can call our use from input hook and decide to pass an initial value of, let's say, franc. So someone can decide to call our hook and pass an initial value, so we don't have to like hard code this empty string since we don't know the initial value of that person's component. So for that, we are going to receive initial value, and then we are going to pass that down to our use state. Yeah. So now we can go ahead and return input props. So with this, we have been able to extract our logic for handling our form input change and also the value of the current value of the form input and the updated value, and create something that can be reused all over our application. So let's export this and then give it a try. Export default use form input, and we can move over to our app.js and import our custom hook. So let's import use form input. Now for us to use this, we are just going to see how this currently works, and then we are going to modify it. So for us to see how this current method works, let's just head over to our browser and then fill in something like hello world, and then we submit. So we have hello world in our console. Now let's replace it with our custom hook and see how it works. So I'll just delete this and this, then we use form input, then we pass the initial value. So for the initial value, we just pass an empty string, do same for last name, and then we call our use form input hook that we just created. Our use form input hook that we just created, and then we also pass the initial value. Now we need to go and modify certain things, like we don't need the unchanged listeners here again. So we are going to move to our input and then make sure we say, okay, for the unchanged, we want to call first name dot unchanged, which is the one being returned by our custom hook. While for the value, we want to call first name dot value, which is the value being returned by our custom hook. And then for last name, we want to simply do the same, last name dot unchanged and last name dot. Now make no mistake, custom hooks help you to reuse stateful logic, not state. So you don't reuse the same state, but you reuse the stateful logic. So each time you call the use form input hook, it creates a new instance of everything that you see in this file, like inside our custom hook. So you're not reusing the same value and set value for all the different inputs, but each time you call use form input, it creates like an entire new instance of everything you see here, and then you use it afresh. So it shares stateful logic, not state. So we don't have a problem calling it multiple times for different variables. So with that out of the way, let's give it a try. We'll console.log first name dot value and last name dot value. So back to our browser, refresh, and then let's say put James and do submit. So you see we have the value logged on our console, so we don't have any problem with that. Everything works perfectly. But now we are making use of our custom hook. So you can pass an initial value, like let's say franc for the first name, and let's refresh. You see we have franc there by default, so that's the initial value. Remember when we had to receive the initial value in our custom hook, and then we use it as the default value for our use state. So passing franc here makes it the initial value of first name but not of that of last name, because remember we share stateful logic, not state. If we were sharing the same state, then we should have franc and franc here. But since the custom hooks only help us to share stateful logic, not the state, we don't have franc everywhere. So hope that is clear. Now let's move to our second example. So imagine a scenario whereby you have logic that needs to be used in multiple components. Okay, so for this, let's just uncomment this code. So you see I have two components created for counter 1 and counter 2. So if we move into them, you see that we just have a simple counter that starts from 0 and keeps increasing by 1 every 1 second. So if I open counter 2, we have the same logic. So what if you have this type of scenario whereby you have this complex logic that you need to use in multiple places? So you see that we simply have the same thing here and the same thing here. So they are just exactly the same. Now, in such cases, we can make use of custom hooks to be able to reuse this logic in both components without having any issue. So we are just going to go ahead and see how we can manage the state of our two counters from our custom hook. So we'll create a new custom hook that manages the state of our counters so that we can be able to reuse this logic in both components without having to rewrite the entire thing over and over again. So for that, I'll just move into my hooks directory again and create our use counter .jsx. Okay, now for this we need to import use effect and use state. We'll just transfer the logic, and I'll copy this over and then we'll create our hook use counter, paste that in, and then we want to return the value. Okay, we want to return the value. Now always remember to take the initial value and the, so in such scenarios, so I'll take the initial value so that we don't always start the counter at 0, and then we pass the initial value over here, and then we can export the for use counter. Okay, now if we move into our counter 1, we can simply import use counter, and then we can replace all of these with our, let's say value equal to use counter, pass the initial value, and then we don't need all of this, we just use the value there. Now if I go back and refresh my browser, notice that we still have the same result for both counters, although counter 2 is still making use of the hard-coded logic. So for us to fix that, we just simply import our use counter hook, and then we are able to replace all of this with use counter, and then we just use that. Now both counter 1 and counter 2 are making use of our use counter hook. Now let's say we want to start counter 2 from 10. So we use counter with 10 and then refresh. You see that counter 2 begins from 10 while counter 1 begins from 0. That's just to again prove to you that we are not sharing the same state, but we are sharing stateful logic. So you see that the logic is the same, increasing both counters by 1 every 1 second, but they don't have the same state. That's why one is currently at 20 and one is at 30, and so they just keep increasing like that. So now we have been able to make our logic reusable in such a way that we can use it in both components without having to rewrite the entire logic over and over again. Okay, so with that out of the way, I think the concept of what custom hooks are and how they can be helpful it's actually clear. But now, for us to see something like more of a real life example of something that you actually use, that will be done in our example 3, where we look at how to fetch API data using custom hooks. So how to name and structure your custom hooks. It is always good, like I said, to begin the name of your custom hook using the use keyword and then followed by the name, like use counter, use form input. So you see that our hooks, like the names of our hooks, are kind of descriptive. So we give it that descriptive name so that if another developer is working with our code, they'll easily understand what the purpose of that custom hook is. Now, let's move to example 3. Fetch API data, which is more of a real life scenario. Fetch API data using custom hooks. Okay, let's see how we can do that, and then that should be it for this. So I will just create like inside our app.js, or let's create another component. Yeah, keep our code clean. Let's call this API data.jsx. So now we export the component. Let's use this in our app.js before proceeding. So just simply import API data, and then I just say h1 example 3 API fetch, and then have our component. So API data. Okay, I'll just go ahead and comment out our counters so that then I will get it in the way. And now we have API data. So for that, we are going to be using JSON placeholder. So it kind of give us some open endpoints that we can make API calls to and get some feedback. So if I click like on the post endpoint, so it's going to fetch some data from the internet, and then should get some couple of posts back. Let me verify what's going on. Okay, yeah, so now you see that we get some data. So it's just like an open endpoint where we can make API calls and get a response. So we're going to be using this for the demo. So let's go ahead and get everything up and running. So like let's see how we are going to do things like the normal way before moving into the way of like making use of our custom hook. So moving into our API data component, I'll simply import use effect. Okay, so use effect. So let's just call fetch. Now we are supposed to pass our URL, then .den. Now we'll say res. Want to return res.json, then another .den, get the JSON response and log that to the console. Okay, so let's do that now. JSON, I think something opened and not closed. Just make this see. Okay, that seems to be the issue. So okay, so we need to pass the endpoint. That's actually the issue. So I'll just copy this out and then let's see. Yeah, fetch post and then let's check our console. Okay, so you see we have this like running twice, the first time and then the second time. So we can fix this since the use effect hook runs like twice when we are in strict mode, because if we take this out you notice that it runs just once. Okay, so for us to fix this I will just create a variable, right? We are only going to okay. Like for that data is no. So for us to make sure that we only do this once and not twice, right? We can come down here and check if not no, then we want to do that. Else we want to come down and then just move to the end of the use effect where we return a callback function to do some cleanup and set ignore to true. Okay, so if we do something like that and refresh, we only get that once. So now what we want to actually do is want to be able to set our data into the JSON response that we get. So how can we be able to achieve this, but now let's say using a custom hook to fetch API data? So we'll go ahead and create a custom hook. Let's say use fetch data .jsx. Okay, so for this we are going to need our use effect and our use state. So function use fetch data use fetch data, and then we are going to declare the same variable that we have over here. So what I'm trying to show you is how to transition from like your normal code into a custom hook. And remember, you only use a custom hook when you have a scenario whereby you keep repeating a specific logic that make use of React, like the hooks that originally comes with React. So when you have such a scenario, you can easily create a custom hook. But if your code does not make use of React hook, you can just simply create a normal reusable function and then return whatever value you have there. But if you have code that make use of React hooks like the use effect or the use state, then you can create a custom hook that does all the operation and then returns a value at the end. So, and always make sure that the code is something that you reuse in multiple places. This way your hook can be used in all those different places to achieve the same result. Now after doing that, we want to move our use effect over here. So we do the same thing, set the data, and then at the end we just return the data. Then we export use fetch data. I want to export it as default. Okay, now we can import our hook, import use fetch data, and then we can use it. But now notice, let's first use the hook and then get rid of all of this, and then we can use our hook. Now inside our use effect, we can just go ahead and console.log the data. Now we are going to get null. Now the reason being because the data actually takes some time, like it takes some time to go and fetch the actual data on the internet before coming back with the result. So for us to actually see the result, we use our data, pass it to our use effect, so that when the value kind of like gets updated with what we got from our custom hook, then the use effect once again and actually display the data that was fetched. So if we do that and refresh, you see we have null, null, and then the actual data that was fetched. So when the data actually returns from the API call, the use effect then logs that data to the console. Now this is working, but not the best way to do things, because imagine we have a second endpoint that does not fetch post, but let's say fetches something like to-dos, because there's another endpoint for that. Or let's say comments. Okay, we have another endpoint that fetches comments like this, not to-dos. There are two different endpoints. How do we handle that? So the best way is we can use backticks for template string, and then rather than hard coding the URL, we actually receive it as a parameter. So we receive the URL, and then we can get rid of this and say $URL. Now we can do something like that. So when calling our use fetch data, can pass /post, and you see that we are still able to achieve the same result as before. But now we have made it in a way that we can not only, we don't only have to use our use fetch data to get post, but we can also be able to fetch other things such as comments. So we can also fetch comments and go to /comments. Yeah, so we can also be able to fetch comments, and then let's just add this so that if it gets updated, we should also reminder. So console.log comments, and then we should be able to refresh and get comments, and then this is our post. So we have the post and we have the comments. Now we have been able to reuse our use fetch data over and over to fetch different things. We have fetch post and we have fetch comments. If we want to fetch a single post, it's just as simple as getting the URL from here. Like, okay, let's say to do like /to do/1. Let's try that for the post. /post/1. Then we just refresh. Nope, seems like that does not work for the post. Yeah, we'll just do that for to-dos /1, and then we should be able to get a single to-do. This is it. So we have our single to-do over here, completed false, and then this. So the reason why you're seeing comments to do and comments again is because like it runs multiple times. Remember, when any of these changes, the use effect gets called over again. So kinds of it runs the code over and over. So now we have been able to create a custom hook that fetches data from an external API and then returns that data for our component to make use of it. So you can go ahead and explore custom hooks in React and create custom hooks to do different things such as maybe handling animations in your application and things like that. So let me know in the comment section if you would like me to do another video on custom hooks. Maybe if you didn't understand something, then if you didn't understand something, just let me know in the comment section and I'm going to do another video explaining that concept or maybe with more examples. So now I think we have been able to understand where and when to use custom hooks and how custom hooks function in React. So make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so that you get notified whenever we create a new content, and thanks for watching. Bye.